Let's talk about working with Gene Kuhn.
I had very little to do with Gene. He seemed like a pleasant man. We had very few conversations. As I said earlier, he was the one person who didn't know me and know my work. And he had, in fact, recommended the other fellow who came in to read for Chekhov. But he seemed to be beloved. Everybody seemed to think very highly of him. And for a while he was producer, and then I think sometime into the third year, or sometime shortly thereafter, he became ill, and somewhere in there he passed away.
And let's talk about working with your co-stars, William Shatner.
Bill Shatner. As I say, during the television series, he was a lot of fun. I mean, he kept it light and laughing, and to be sure, every shot was set up so that he'd be in the foreground. And he just automatically blocked it that way. And as I said before, the directors just went along with it. I mean, Bill was the money player, and the lead of the show, but he was civil. I never get the sense that he wanted to be any of the supporting actors' pals. He enjoyed hanging out with Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley.
Okay. Leonard Nimoy.
Leonard was always very quiet, taciturn, very much, it seemed, internalized. It took years to learn that he was a man with a strong social conscience, that he had very specific religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, that he would never make a show of his loyalty, but that if called upon, you could count on him. So that was really nice to know.
DeForest Kelley.
Forrest was great. He was a lot of fun. He was the one actor on the set who could move very, very easily between the two leads and the supporting actors. So he got along with Bill and Leonard very well. At the same time, he got along with us on the same level, and we talked on the phone. We had good times together.
James Doohan.
James was kind of on the volatile side. Got angry easily, but just as quickly would become very warm and generous and friendly guy by nature. But easy to irritate, but a friendly guy by nature. We had some personal conversations that I didn't think would ever reach that level of personalness as they did. It's a little shocking, but we traded some interesting stories. Okay.
Nichelle Nichols.
Nichelle was always great. She was very, charming and very friendly from the start. She was very friendly. I think, like all of us, she wanted more to do. It may have been a little bit more apparent in her than it was in George, for example, or me. But I don't think she was any more ambitious. It's just that she was a little more confident in expressing it. Always a good friend. I always liked her.
George Takei.
George is a good guy. I had no idea that he harbored the feelings he did about Bill, throughout the years we shot. I thought that I was the one who was most upset with Shatner, because for some peculiar reason, none of us really traded stories about him. None of us said, you know what he did today, or boy, that guy really pisses me off. It was only later, much later, that I realized how angry he had made George. But George did something that was truly to be admired, and I only became aware of almost in retrospect. He was dealt a bad hand frequently. For one thing, I mean, it was his own, not fault, but it was his own responsibility that he did Green Berets. And Green Berets went over, as a feature film that went over by 6 weeks. So the 6 weeks that he was on Green Berets, he would have been on the show and doing many of the lines that I did, because I was brought in to take over for him because he wasn't there. I never knew that it upset him. I never knew that he was upset with me, which I thought was showed a considerable amount of professionalism. I just wondered, you know, I mean, you can't help but extrapolate and wonder, if I was in his place, would I harbor any animosity? And would I harbor any vitriol towards somebody who replaced me? And I'm not sure it's a good thing or a bad thing that I never saw it. I never saw any of that anger, because he talks about it. He writes about it, that he was very upset with me because I had taken over his part. And then in time he came to like me. On the movies, he got screwed on a couple of occasions. He did not have very much to do in the Wrath of Khan, or on The Voyage Home. Both pictures, the others of us had more to do as supporting actors. I say the others, I'm talking about the supporting actors. It goes without saying that Leonard and DeForest, you know, had important roles. George was really dealt badly with on both Wrath of Khan and The Voyage Home. Shatner insisted that a scene where George was promoted and was on screen was struck from the movie. And in Star Trek IV, we're all on the streets of San Francisco, a scene where he's supposed to meet some little Asian child who it turns out is his great-great-great-grandfather. That never was shot because the little kid was a pain in the ass, and no, I don't want to do it. No, I don't want to do it. And by the time he was willing to do it, the sun had gone down, and we never got back there to shoot it. Incidentally, that scene was my idea. The idea that it was his great-great-grandchild. Anyway, but he handled it so well. He didn't pout and he didn't grouse. And I thought, why? That's a really professional attitude. And I know that I could not have been counted on to be as professional as he was, and that I would have bitched and moaned about it.
Let's talk about some of your favorite episodes.
Well, in terms of TV, Spectre of the Gun. I got to go to the planet. I got to get the girl, and I got to get killed. All of which were, high points. So I love the way it was shot. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. We didn't have a lot of money, and we couldn't build whole sets, so we built them just as facades. And it somehow lent to this whole abstract idea of this planet and what was going on. It just played in perfectly to the fact that this was an illusionary kind of environment that we were in. I also thought City on the Edge of Forever was a terrific episode, which I was not involved in. It was a first-year episode, but I thought it was done with great heart, a very, very touching show. Joan Collins was excellent. I thought Bill did a terrific job, and the whole idea of him having to let her go and die in order to for mankind to go forward in the direction it was supposed to was extremely well executed. An idea that had been done before, but was extremely well executed. And Harlan Ellison wrote that.
Well, there's a classic episode, Troubles with Tribbles. Could you describe the episode?
Yeah, it was fun. Troubles with Tribbles was fun. It was more lighthearted than most that we did. Bill was funny. When all the tribbles fall on him, his expressions were really funny. The consternation that was felt because these things were multiplying so quickly, we didn't know what to do with them, was a cute situation. The fight that we had with the Klingons, Jimmy and I had the Klingons because they insulted the ship, not so much the captain, but the ship. That was a source of mirth. All in all, I think it was a good show and worked well, and the audience really loved it. They really. What I found was interesting, and what I don't think the audience understood at the time, was these things that moved around the set were immobile, and all they were skins, and these furry skins that they put on wind-up toys. And they wound up the toys, and you couldn't see the key or whatever it was, and they had them move across the set, and they just shot at MOS, mid-out sound, so you didn't know that they were going as they walked across. So it was a departure in the way we in the kind of stories we did, and that was well received.
What episodes do fans talk to you most about your character Chekhov that they really enjoyed or resonated with them?
In terms of the television series, I think Who Mourns for Adonias, because I talked about something about Russia in that, and I also thought that was a good show. I thought it was very touching. Apollo has no place to go and no one to have authority over. It was an interesting idea. The ones where I had a love interest, the apple, I got to kiss the girl. There's only about 3 or 4 because most of the time, as I say, I was hitting the blue button because I was depressed, and the yellow button because I was afraid, and the red button because I was angry, and the purple because I was in a rage. That's the way I looked at it, and that was all there was to act.
Were there any episodes that you felt didn't live up to the standards?
Well, I felt there was one that I thought was went on a different track. I can't think of the expression than the other. I thought mostly we had a very progressive point of view in terms of humanity and equality and justice. But I was always concerned about the one where it was determined that because the Klingons had a certain weapon, I don't remember how it goes, but we had to have the weapon too. And that it was an accelerating balance of power. I don't think it was the one that was called balance of power. It was an accelerating balance of power where we kept adding weapons because they had them. And this is what we were concerned with at that time in terms of the atomic bomb. The Russians had it, and we had to have it, and we had to have as many as they did. And they were putting them in Cuba, and we had them in Turkey, and a very dangerous way to go, because that gets out of hand, and suddenly someone makes a human mistake, and you have a situation that blows up into a global conflict. So I didn't think that episode represented the kind of the kind of thinking that was generally developed in the show. And I think it was one where it was a primitive group. We were giving weapons to a primitive group, and the Klingons were doing the same.
Talk about how Gene Roddenberry's departure from the show affected it.
Well, I didn't know really what was going on behind closed doors very much. I knew he had principle, and that I'm sure principle laced with ego. Things were not. He had issued some dictums, evidently, that were not being carried out, and he became disillusioned to a degree. I don't remember what they were. Whether it was about how Spock was represented and how the networks felt about it, or it was something else. But he got to a point where I think it was a little too wearying for him. I know he did another movie of the week that he gave me a part in. It was a very small part, but he gave it to me because he knew that I was hurting financially. This was after Star Trek went off the air. And it was about a robot and a scientist who controls him. And I'm sure you have the name there somewhere. I can't think of it. But he left that because he wanted Leonard to play the part of the robot. And the network said no. So he just walked away from it. And it only had its initial airing, and then was discarded, and they didn't pursue it.
Now, did you ever receive any reaction from the Russian community to the character of Chekhov?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. That wasn't being seen. It was the era of the Iron Curtain. It wasn't being seen in the Soviet Union. Now, I was told, and I don't know if it was told as an ego stroke to me, but Leonard and Bill went to the screening of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. It was held in Russia, and at their Academy of Arts, and for the elite of the cultural community. And that they loved the film and they loved the character of Chekhov. Now, that's what I was told. It's all secondhand. But they felt a certain pride in the fact that we had incorporated a Russian onto the ship, and he was treated with respect and cared for, and that he was an equal among equals. So that's the only thing I ever heard. I did get. This is a total aside. I did get to meet a couple of Russian astronauts, cosmonauts. I think it was in England. And we took pictures together. And what I found curious was when we stood together, we were all the same size. Because those ships they used were tiny. They were really tiny. And you couldn't get anybody bigger than 5'5" or 5'6" into them.
So, did you receive any residuals?
We received residuals from Star Trek series for the first SAG contract, which covered all the different series. In 1967, when it was renegotiated, or 1968, when it was renegotiated, originally called for 10 residual payments. And then it was added, I think, another 6 to that, and then it expired. So residuals expired in the mid-'70s. There were no more residuals, and they were, in effect, showing the episodes for free in terms of where the actors stood.
What about the royalties for toys?
There were some royalties. What we got, George, Jimmy, Nichelle, and I got together. We all felt that we were being shortchanged on the royalties for name and likeness, and we were taking a trip all together to a convention, and there was an attorney on the ship, on the plane, who had argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and I sat down and I talked to him about what our situation was, and he decided he would handle it for us, or he offered to handle it. And a long story short, initially they said, this is all the money you're getting, and this is all what you deserve. And they gave us a rundown of who got what. And I, in fact, got the least. I had been on this series 1 year less, and there had been less promotion done on my character than they had on the others. Jimmy's character had the most, and then George and the show are pretty equal. But when we brought in the attorney and we argued the fact that our principal argument was that these were not fictional characters like comic book characters. We played these characters. We were the people who were identified with these characters. When they made the models and when they made the drawings, they tried to represent us. They tried to make them look like us. So we were permanently identified with these characters, and that would in some way inhibit our ability to be seen as other characters, as other people who are playing, and that there should be some compensation made for the fact that we had such a enduring identification with them. So they talked about it. Before they made a decision, I do remember saying to them, and when we were talking about it, and they were very calm. There was some attorneys there. There were some producers there, and I said, gentlemen, think how ingratiating this would be for the public, for you to take into account the supporting actors and pay them something. How lovely it would be for the audience to know that you cared enough about these supporting actors to give them some additional compensation. And of course, what I was saying was, if you don't do this, they're going to be really pissed at you. And they got the idea. So they gave us a lump payment of $1 million for four of us to share, which was better than a kick in the behind, And of course, the attorney got more than any of us, because when we divided it all up, we still made about $250,000. And I hasten to add that if it had been done according to the sales, the name and like sales for each of us, Jimmy would have gotten the most, and I would have gotten the least. But it was Jimmy's choice that we should all get paid equally. So that's certainly something to be said for Jimmy, to be commended for.
Now let's talk just really briefly about Star Trek conventions, and what is fan reactions to you every time you attend one?
It's interesting. I was mentioning this to a promoter just the other day. It occurred to me. When I started, I was considered the youngest of the cast. I wasn't actually the youngest. George was about 9 months younger than I was, but I was considered the youngest cast. I was the one that the youth sort of gravitated toward, the really young kids. And I filled that bill, and that's why they hired me. As time went by, DeForest Kelley became the grandfatherly kind of figure, or at least the fatherly kind of figure. And he was the really, although Spock and Kirk were really endearing, and they enjoyed them, and they had great feeling for them. It was DeForest who was the closest to their family, who became a member of their family. And then when DeForest passed away, over time it became Jimmy. Jimmy was the grand uncle, he was the, and people treated him that way. They started to hold out the chairs for him, when he sat down, and he became a little bit more infirm with time. But they absolutely delighted in his presence as the one they could most easily identify with, as a family member. And my feeling is that now, with the passing of both these gentlemen, sans hair, more wrinkles, that I am becoming that character for them. I'm becoming that personality. I'm becoming the fatherly or the grandfatherly character for them. And I see that a little bit in the way I'm treated when I go to conventions. And it's it's very nice. I mean, it's on the one hand, I don't want to particularly be thought of as, as fragile and on my last leg. But on the other hand, I sense a kind of that people extend themselves a little bit more on my behalf because of the stature that the character now has for them.
Now, I'm going to talk briefly about the Star Trek animated series.
Okay.
Now, how did you feel about not being included in the voiceover work for it?
I was really upset. For one thing, I had written one of the episodes, and Gene gave me that assignment because he'd seen another screenplay that I had written, nothing to do with Star Trek. He thought I could do it, but I also thought that my doing the screenplay, teleplay, would have nothing to do with my being cast as Chekhov. But the guys who were running that company, I can't think of their names. I can say that I'm getting a little tired. They decided that they wanted to make this animated show as budget conscious as they could, and in fact, they wanted Majel to do not only her voice, but Nichelle's voice, and for Jimmy to do his voice and George Takei's voice, so they could cut down on two of the actors, the salaries of two of the actors. And I was going to be dismissed entirely. Well, Leonard heard, this is one of those things about Leonard. He heard that this was the case, that they were going to cut out Nichelle and Jimmy, and he gave them an ultimatum that he would not be in it, he would not be involved unless they were, because they were there at the beginning. They helped sell the series, and they were responsible for its success. I guess my coming in the second year carried less weight. So he didn't argue at the point for me, but he did argue for them, and made it a fact that George and Nichelle did do their own voices. So my only involvement was the script that I wrote, which I culled from the topical news about cloning. My story was about cloning. And it got more and more bizarre as I wrote it, because Gene decided that since this is animation, we could do anything we wanted. We didn't have to worry about money or the intricacies of building, creatures. So he had a lot of talking vegetables, is what he did. And I wasn't too pleased with that. I thought that was taking the point a little far, and damaging its credibility. And I don't think it was that well received. I think it was one of those episodes that if you were giving them from an A grade to a D grade, mine was probably a C plus or B minus grade.
Was this the first time you'd actually written for a Star Trek storyline? Did you ever do that during the original series, of offering an idea for the story writers?
I did offer, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But yeah, this was the first time I had actually done that, and but I also asked them to promise me that I could play one of the characters, one of the new characters that I had written, that he was only in the one episode. Dr. Caniculus, his name was. It was a scientist, and they said, yeah, you can play that. But it wasn't up to Dorothy or Gene. It was up to the guys who were running the cartoon production, and they let me come in and read, but I had the very distinct feeling that it was a very token gesture. They had no intention of having me play the part. And they didn't. They ended up having Jimmy do it, because they didn't want to pay the extra money. And they were just pacifying me. As far as offering some ideas, for Star Trek, way back between the second and third season. No. After the third season, and before we started the movies, there was a plan to do another series, another television series of Star Trek. They were going to do it as another television series. And they sent us all a breakdown of how the characters would have evolved during the 3 or 5 years that we had not been shooting. And my character had the least detail. It was, if everybody else's character was a paragraph or two, mine was a couple of lines. So I wrote to Gene and I said to him that there doesn't seem to be a lot to go on here, but what might be interesting is you made Chekhov the head of security and responsible for Kirk's safety. I said, what we have here, we have a very interesting comic relief situation where Chekhov is always willing to put himself on the line to save Kirk, who needs no saving, And I thought that would be a refrain that we could come back to. And he liked it, and that's the last I heard of it.
Now, let's talk about really just back to the animated series. What was your opinion of James Doohan's, performance of Chekhov?
I thought James Doohan was a better actor than he was given credit for. I always thought that he was versatile, and that I'd seen him do a couple of other things. And I always thought that as good as he was as Scotty, he was not used as much as he could. I think he was a better actor than any of the other supporting actors, and better actor than DeForest. I thought Jimmy was really a clever guy and very versatile. If a little bombastic, if a little annoying from time to time. But that was my sense of him.
Okay, last question. What do you think is the legacy of Star Trek?
Well, a lot of things have creeped into the meaning of Star Trek and the significance of Star Trek in the last few years. A lot of which has to do with technology, the fact that we've proven that the things that we had conceived in our minds were now, actual mechanisms, actual devices that could be operated. So that is, to some degree, changed the legacy of Star Trek. But I think also we have, and I noticed this from my examination of Facebook and of Twitter, that there are people now who are following the show who are not engineers, who are not geeks, their word, not mine, who have interests and occupations that are far removed from anything that we would have associated with Star Trek, identified, mechanics, I don't know, whatever. But certainly we have become a multi-cultural kind of image. There's a multicultural image to Star Trek. Because what I thought originally, and this is what I was starting to say, was that I thought we were appealing to a certain kind of humanitarianism, and a certain kind of idealism. That we were a group of adventurers who were trying to make things better. That we were trying to keep systems intact, not to invade other cultures and destroy them, but to assist those who needed assistance in a benign way, not in an aggressive way. And that's what the series seemed to me to be about mostly. But with all of these new with all of these new fans over the years, I bet, there's 100,000, 200,000 members of the NRA who are Star Trek fans, just because of the way things have gone. And a lot of people who are a lot more conservative, who find a way to justify that conservatism for themselves that makes sense. In fact, I noticed that there were people who were voting Republican ticket, who were putting down Obama, who were also following Star Trek. So that is certainly different, and that is not the legacy that I would have thought would be ultimately the one people would remember. So I still think that the most prevalent part is that we were a very humanitarian show that believed in racial equality and ethnic equality, ideological respect for all peoples, for all cultures. That was the intention going in. That was Gene's intention, and that's what I'd like to think is still the primary goal of the show.
Wonderful. Now let's talk about after Star Trek.
Okay.
After it went off the air, did you feel that you were typecast, or what roles were you receiving at that point?
Well, the first time I went off the air was when the series was canceled. And at that point, I was a little desperate, I was making phone calls that I never thought I would make, that I didn't have the intestinal fortitude. I mean, to call up directors and say, I'm looking for work, that was not my M.O. And inevitably, they'd say, well, we'll get back to you. Nobody, with the exception of Jodie Gusta, would take those calls very seriously. So I started writing. In 1970, 71, I started writing, and the first thing I wrote was a show called Whatever Happened to the Class of '65. And that probably was my best experience. My experience as a writer, television writer, descended. It was a descending shape to them, as opposed to one where things get better and better. The best one was the first one. There was no editor on the show. It was just me and the producer. There was no... there was a minimum of characters you had to write for that had rules. Because it was an anthology series, so you created most of the characters when you wrote it. So I had a good time, and I took this from newspapers. I took this from a book. It was a book. I didn't read the book, but it was a book about a graduating class in Pacific Palisades, I think, high school, and the authors followed what happened to these students when they left school, and what happened in the next 5 or 10 years. So I projected on, a story that would involve some of these students. And that's what the whole series was about fictitious students who went on to do different things. And it came out pretty good. It came out to be, in a 56-page story, for an hour, it came out to be about 95 pages. So I had to do a lot of editing, and it was very painful. And I know that there were some points that were not totally clear by the time it was cut down, because I had to cut so much out. But it was serviceable. And it went on the air pretty much the way I wrote it. So I was pleased about that. The shows that followed that, like Family, with
Meredith Baxter Birney.
And the other folks who were on it, was much less like what I had written. It was like they had rewritten it. And in each one, I wrote about 4 or 5 episodes of different TV shows, and each one was less and less what I had in mind. came to the point where I was called in to write an episode of The Incredible Hulk. And when you pitch as a freelancer, to a television series, the first thing you do is you come in and you give them a verbal outline, nothing that that's committed to paper, and if they like it, then they give you a go ahead to do, and that's a treatment, and then they give you a go ahead to do the first draft, and then they pay you for that, and if they like the first draft, then you, I think, automatically get a second draft, and then you're also expected to do a polish. At least those were the rules, the union rules at the time. So I came in for this episode of The Incredible Hulk, and again, I took the idea from what I'd read in the newspapers, and it was about a community that had been discovered in New Jersey that was interracial, African American and Native American. In New Jersey, in a remote part of New Jersey, who had very little contact with the outside world after all these years. I put it in the Appalachians, which I thought would be even more viable in the Appalachians. And I wrote the outline. The two women who were in charge loved it. They came to me after the outline and asked me if I'd be interested in becoming a story editor for the show, because the story editor was leaving. That scared me a little bit. I don't know if I wanted to, be at a studio office 8 hours a day, or 9 hours a day. So I said, let me think about it. In the meantime, I wrote the outline. I wrote the first draft based on the outline. There wasn't anything in the first draft that wasn't in the outline. And after several weeks, they got back to me and said, this is a story worth listening to because it tells you a certain way that things work in Hollywood. They came back and said, well, we're gonna do your story, but we need to talk about changes. And the executive producer is now back in town. The executive producer was an ex-Marine who had been out shooting a 2-part Incredible Hulk, and he'd just come back and he'd read my first draft, and apparently he wasn't pleased. So they brought me in, and the three of us were sitting there, and maybe it was already the second draft. I don't know. Actually, I think I wrote the second draft too. Anyway, he wasn't pleased, and he says, he says, we'll do this. We'll do this show, but we're going to put it in Mexico. And I said, why Mexico? He says, well, it's more believable that you have these isolated communities in Mexico where the people would think, this is the thing that I left out, people think that the Hulk is an incarnation of the devil, because that's what I was saying that the Appalachians were thinking. They were so isolated and they never seen this, that when they saw the Hulk, they thought he was an incarnation of the devil. It says that wouldn't happen in America because we have too many newspapers and too much media, but it could happen in Mexico. And I said, no, can't do that. And that was evidently, a sacrilege for me to say that. I said, to do that is to intimate Mexican people are less bright and less aware than North Americans would be. You're saying that they're more superstitious, and because you're labeling them as something other than North Americans or Caucasians, it is implied and to be inferred that we are giving them these assignations as well. These not assignations, these signatures as well, that we are saying that they are culturally impoverished and are not as smart, and I can't do that. And they said, well, if you can't do it, we can't shoot the show. I said, well, so be it. I can't do it. And he then turned to the two women, young women, and said, because he was frustrated, he says, who gave him the go-ahead to shoot this anyway? And they totally took the fifth. saying, "Well, this isn't. This draft is not what he had in the outline. We thought it was going to be a Shirley Jackson story about stoning the villagers who every year, because it was a ritual in the community, the lottery. It was called the lottery. It was a ritual in the community to stone people every year. It was part of their ritual." And I said, we never did discuss that, we never decided on that. I said, if you look at the outline, there's nothing about that in the outline. And the first draft, and you passed, you gave me the okay on the outline. So so that's what this first draft is predicated on. So he listened to my argument, and they said nothing. They were also making $300,000 a year each, and they were not going to. This is my own editorial comment, but my sense was they were not going to jeopardize that for whatever benefit, integrity, and honesty could give them. So they went the way they went, and then he says, "Well, we can't make the show." And I said, "Okay." And I walked out, and that was the end of it. I did get paid for it. I got paid everything. I got paid for as if they'd gone to shoot it, but that was the end of it. And you can see how the politics play.
Before we get to Babylon 5, which I'd like to do, I'd like just to briefly talk about Columbo. Columbo. You guest starred on Columbo. It's the episode called Fade into Murder. And this was your first time acting again with Bill Shatner after Star Trek, correct?
And guess who cast me? Jodie Gust. Jodie Gust cast me. Story is, I only worked one day. It's not that great a story, although there is a moment that's interesting. I played a police sergeant. You know, Columbo was always, Peter Falk was always, it was part of his character, and was to find, somebody would pontificate one solution to the crime, and then he would come and show how it was really something else, you know. And so I was a police sergeant, and I was at the murder crime, and we started shooting at 3:00 in the afternoon, and it got to be about 2 a.m. We were still shooting, and the dialogue had given me had me give an explanation to how the murder occurred, and Falk had listened to it and listened to it and listened to it, and he took the director aside and said, you know, his explanation isn't different enough from mine, so we got to give him some new dialogue. 2:00 in the morning. I said to him, tell me the gist of what you want. I'm not going to be able to remember this. Just tell me the gist, and I'll improvise it. So that's what they did, and as far as it went, it was successful. They shot it as a master. They didn't have a writer's, a screen. What am I thinking of? Somebody who's following the script. Script master. Didn't have a script master to follow it because we were doing it off the top of my head. So there were no close-ups. There were no cuts. There were nothing. So I did it, and I did it successfully, but all in one shot. And they couldn't go back and do the reshoots. First of all, by now it was past 3, because they didn't have them marked. They didn't have any of them marked. And since it was the first time that I had worked in a long time, I felt, inordinately proud of the work. I mean, it was really inordinate because it did not measure up to what I'd actually done. My imagination got in the better of me, and I made a point of telling everybody in the business that I had done this character, and I took out an ad in the trades and called up other casting directors I knew to watch it, because I had not worked in several years, and got to see it. It was a master. You could hardly tell it was me. I'm walking up here and I'm walking down there and I'm showing where the murder took place and where the murder took place there and there and there. But you know, it was on my back most of the time. It was on profile. It was almost. I was almost indistinguishable from the background. So I mean, I fulfilled the requirements of the scene. I did it credibly, but you had no idea who it was who did it. So, but as far as working, I didn't work with Bill. Bill was in other scenes. I remember we took a trolley, or a little go-kart together to go to lunch. And that was about and he didn't talk to me because that was the time when it was between the series and the movies, and I don't think he remembered my name.
Okay. Let's go on to Babylon 5.
Okay.
Now, how did the role of Alfred Bester come about?
Well, I knew Joe Michael Straczynski very casually. I had met him through Harlan. I mean, as I say, Kevin Bacon is in this everywhere. And I met him at a couple of parties, and he had asked me at one point if I would read a script that he had written for Twilight Zone as an editor that was not done. And it was a 2-character script, and I asked if my wife would read it with me. My wife is an actress. So we read it for him on a radio show called Hour 25. It was science fiction, and it was at, I think, 11 in the evening or 1 in the morning, or maybe 1 in the morning for the 25. And we did a good job. We read it, and that was the end of it, and he thanked me. And then I didn't have occasion to talk to him for a while. And then, we didn't hang out, we just didn't hang out. Then I got a call that he had sold this series, Babylon 5, and that he had a part that he'd like me to do. And I thought, wow, that's great. And I think he sent me the script, and I promptly had a heart attack. I mean, literally, not because of the script. I just had a heart attack. I was. This is 1993. Yeah. And I was in the hospital. I had a quadruple bypass. And other than my family, he was the first one I called, because they were supposed to start shooting in August, and this was in July. And I said, Joe, I'm not going to be available to do this. I'm recovering from this heart attack. He says, okay, we'll hold the script, and we'll shoot when you're ready. And I thought that was amazing. That was absolutely amazing that somebody would do that. And as a matter of fact, it was amazing, and he couldn't do it. But he didn't forget his promise. He had to get somebody else to shoot it because they ran out of scripts. And he got a terrific actor who was much better than I would have been. He got an English actor to do it, and we had just the right quality for this role.
Do you know what the character was, the original character?
Well, he was played by an Englishman, and he and another guy, they get into this guy's brain. I mean, literally, they get into our captain's brain. This was a first-year show with Captain Sinclair, I think his name was. That's amazing. I remember that, Captain Sinclair, and you see them physically inside of his brain, changing things around. So it went very well. But then I got a call from him saying, we'll do another character. We'll do somebody else. And I got home. I was home for about a month, and I got a script. And the character was named Alfred Bester. And it was about a guy who sort of was in charge of the Psi Corps. It was a group of telepaths that was somewhat underground, and were also being persecuted for their talent and their belief system. And what would have been a one-shot deal, as if I had played the first part, now became a multiple deal, and I appeared in each season to the extent that I ended up doing 12 episodes and was named by a couple of groups as the best villain in series television, best science fiction villain, etc. And got a considerable amount of recognition for it, and became one of the best, most satisfying experiences I ever had. It was just a great experience. Here I was, in each episode, I was critical to the story. It wasn't like, Captain, I don't know what's out there, and then let Captain Kirk tell you all about what's going on. Here was a character who moved the story along, not just articulated the circumstances, but actually was involved in the story itself, who had his own belief system, his own internal life, his own personal problems and conflicts. And we got to investigate those over the course of 12 episodes. It was a dimensional character, and one that was written with, as I say, considerable individuality. So I had an absolute ball, and everybody treated me very well. I'm sure my reputation as belonging to Star Trek had a great deal to do with it, but they were also good people. All the cast, Bruce Boxleitner and Jerry Doyle and all the cast. I can't think of their names. And I apologize profusely because they don't come to me. But Maya, they were all terrific. The executive branch of the production, everybody was great. They showed me the tapes in advance. They didn't necessarily ask for my input, but they never changed anything that I added, and that was not such a small thing, because Joe was very, very adamant about having his dialogue appear as he wrote it, and occasionally I would change things, and he let it go. Each time he let it go, and I think it was to the advantage of the script. I mean, there weren't a lot of things, but there were half a dozen things that I did. In any case, it was a great experience over 5 years. I had a wonderful time. I really feel it was the act 2 of my life in television, and never had a harsh word with anybody, and I made a lifelong friend of Joe, although we still don't see each other. I asked him to speak at my star ceremony, and he volunteered to do so, even though it meant coming from out of town because he was on location. So Babylon 5 has a particularly good place in my heart, a kind place in my heart.
Okay, we're going to stop, change
Good.
tapes.